I've read almost 32 books this year, and 14 of them were classics. Hi, my name is Amanda Fagan, and I like writing, but to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader too. So for the past few years, I've been upping my reading goal every year, and I usually do an accumulation at the end of the year where I review all the books I read. But I realize I read a lot of different genres, and some people that like one genre might never read another genre that I'm talking about. So I'm doing a few separate videos and focusing on genres. And I'm starting with my most read genre, and that is classic books. What's fun about studying English in college is that sometimes you get forced to read books that you never would have picked up, and then you end up enjoying them a lot. And for those who don't know, I'm getting my degree in theater, film, and English. Theater and film are my major, and English is my minor. And at the beginning of the year, I was in a costume design class, and we had to read The Tempest by William Shakespeare and design costumes based off of this play. This is a Shakespeare play that breaks a lot of rules. It does not fit into the typical three genre rule where Shakespeare writes histories, tragedies, and comedies. This is technically a comedy, but it kind of is an amalgamation of things. Arguably one of his worst plays, apparently. I did not know that until 8 months after reading this, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless. Was it my favorite Shakespeare play? No. Did I hate it? No. Some people think I'm too nice, so I'm going to try to be harsher this year. I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. I feel like if I give it below a 3, I didn't enjoy it, and I did enjoy reading it. Would I read it again? I don't know. Hey, it's another Shakespeare play to add to my repertoire, am I right? Another fun book I read this January because of another class I was in was Travels with Charlie in Search of America by John Steinbeck. And I read this book for travel writing, and I would have never picked up this book if not for that class. I had never read Steinbeck before, and I wanted to read more classic authors this year that I hadn't read before because I've read over 50 classic books, not including plays. If I include plays, I've probably read like closer to 70. I've read a lot of classics, and I'd never read anything by Steinbeck. So this was a fun introduction. It was one of his last books, and it was more autobiographical, more memoir style. Basically, Steinbeck, towards the end of his life, did a road trip around the United States in the 1960s with his dog Charlie. I talk about it more in this other video here. I loved this book, and I recommended it to my dad, who had not been reading a lot at the time, and he read it in 3 days, and now he's been on a reading grind ever since this book. So this got my dad out of his reading slump. This is hard because it is a really good book. I'm going to give it a 4.9 out of 5 stars because I genuinely like this book a lot. I'm not giving it 5 just because I don't think I cried during it, and there are a few books on this list that I cried to. But I really, really liked it, and it opened up a whole new genre and style of writing to me, and now I really love travel writing, so really recommend. This next book I read in January/February. I finished it in early February, and genuinely, after I read this book, it made it into my top 3 for a little while. It was that good, and I still would consider it one of my favorite books. It is the abridged version because the original version is so long, but I didn't read the shortest abridged version. I read like somewhere in between, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I had never read anything by Dumas, and like I said, I wanted to read more classic authors, and I got this as a gift for Christmas from a friend last year, or the other year. This is the 600-page abridged version. There's a lot of 400-page abridged versions, and the original is, I believe, 1,200 pages. So it's not the entire book, but it's a book. I enjoyed this book so much. I've never read a book like this before in my life, and I can't even do it justice in this video talking about how good it was. And the way that it's ordered is so fascinating. Like, you start at the beginning with the main character, with the Count of Monte Cristo before he is the Count, and you just learn about his life and how he ended up in this prison and how he had like everything going for him. He was going to get a promotion, he was going to marry the girl he loved, and then he gets framed for a crime, thrown into prison. That's just the first few chapters. And then you segue into these other stories about these other characters, and they're meeting this Count of Monte Cristo, and you don't realize that the guy you learned about at the beginning, like, he is the Count of Monte Cristo. And he's like, has this 10-year plot of revenge for the people that wrongfully put him in prison and also are the reason he didn't end up with the woman he loved and the reason his dad died. And so he has this 10-year plot for revenge, and it takes 10 years to plan out. Like, he's so specific about it. Like, it's insane. It's such a good story. I can't do it justice to describe all the little details. From every little thing means something, even if it's so random, like his emeralds and him like adopting this princess from another like it's so crazy, all the stuff that happens, but it all makes so much sense. And see how animated I'm getting? It's because it's that good. I can't do it justice. You know what? Since it earned a spot, this is my new rating. If it earned a spot in my top 3 at any point, it's going to be a 6 out of 5 if it made it into my top favorite books of all time. So we're giving this book a 6 out of 5 stars. The next classic book that I read was actually a reread, which is A Journey to the Center of the Earth. And I read this in March because I actually wrote an adaptation for the book, a comedic farcical adaptation for the stage with mixed media, and it was actually produced and watched by a paying audience, and it was nominated for 3 Orange Curtain Awards, so that is pretty awesome. And because of that, I'm now a member of the Dramatists Guild of America, a full-fledged member. So I'm pretty proud of that achievement, and it's thanks to this book and the amazing theater department that I worked with. It wasn't the most action-packed, exciting classic I've read, no, but it was fun drawing out certain themes that were very small in the book and taking creative liberties with them. If you like science fiction that really delves deep into the science behind the fiction, and I do think Harry, the main character, is kind of annoying at times. He is such a downer. His uncle just wants to have fun and whimsy and go on adventures, and he's like, I want to come, and then he complains the whole time. It's like, why are you here, Harry? I'm going to give this book a 3.2 out of 5 stars because I did, even though it was kind of slow at parts, I did enjoy the book. It was very fascinating. The next classic book that I read was from March as well, and it's actually a reread. It is a book that I read for the second time, and it made me cry on the plane. I read it on my plane ride over to New York, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it was amazing. Especially, I finished the book as we were landing into New York. It was magical. And then I saw The Great Gatsby on Broadway. Gatsby and then Nick and just their friendship, the tragic tale of the American dream, the green light across the bay. It's so classic. It's so eloquently written. And I love the book because it's harsh. And the ending of the book isn't softened. Like the movies and the musicals try to soften it, try to make certain characters more likable. But I think it works better when all the characters kind of are morally gray people. It's such a good book. It is so good. I can't give every book a 6 out of 5 stars. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 stars because it is really great. But I think The Count of Monte Cristo, I really thought about that book for a really long time. This is very close to getting 6 stars though. I would give it like maybe even 5.5 stars. How about that? We'll give it 5.5 stars out of 5. The next classic book that I read this year was in April, and it was by another author that I had yet to read a book by, but I had read a play by him, Oscar Wilde, and The Picture of Dorian Gray. I had been wanting to read this for a while, but I didn't have a copy, but it was on my TBR because I love Gothic novels. Gothic novels are like my favorite type of novel to read. And I also love romanticism, and this is a Gothic novel that talks about the dangers of romanticism, so I had to read it. I got it in New York at the Strand. It was a beautifully written book. It was a stark contrast to The Importance of Being Earnest, which I had read years prior. Very different, because The Importance of Being Earnest is so comedic, and this is so dark. He gets his picture painted in the beginning of the book, and he sees himself for the first time and really admires himself for the first time and goes, I wish I could stay that young and beautiful forever. Like, I hate this painting because I'll never be this peak ever again. Like, this is perfection, and now that this exists, like, I can never be that again. And he like kind of loses it. It's like a slowly unraveling tale, and by the end you're like, oh, it's somewhat even supernatural. Like, it's not until the very end, and you're like, oh, okay. I felt like I learned a lot from this book, and I contemplated it a lot. I think it was very good, but I'm going to give it a 3.8 stars because it was slower at a few parts. If it's over 3 stars, it's good. I just, compared to the other books I've read this year and all the other classic novels I have read, I think 3.8 stars is a fair rating. It is really good. It's very eloquently written, very beautiful writing by Oscar Wilde. The next classic book that I read was in May, and it is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I had read Jamaica in 2024, and that was my book of the year, so I thought I gotta read the most famous book by Daphne du Maurier, which won Best Novel of the Century. So it's a modern classic, to say the least. Young girl gets married to a rich man. His previous wife died. He's been overrun by grief. He meets her on this trip. He asks her to marry him. She accepts because she's just a ward of some rich lady who doesn't appreciate her. They move to Manderley, his big house, and everyone at the house kind of acts weird, and she thinks it might be haunted by his dead wife. It's a psychological book. I had actually seen the movie, though, before I read it. So I did know some things going into it, but it had been a long time since I saw the movie, so I forgot a lot of it. So I don't know if that's a factor as to why I didn't enjoy it as much as Jamaica Inn. I don't think that's the only reason, because Jamaica Inn was very much more action-packed and a more active main character, while this main character is more passive, but that was the point of the story. She was a great main character. It was her learning to go from passive to active and like coming into herself. So I like Jamaica Inn better, but I still thoroughly enjoyed this book. 4.5 out of 5 stars. This next classic book that I read was in July, and that is The Watsons by Jane Austen, which is actually an unfinished book, but I'm counting it because it's Jane Austen. And it was the last work of Jane Austen's that I had yet to read. For those of you who don't know, Jane Austen is my favorite author. Kind of wrote an EP about her and starred in a play. I'm a member of the Jane Austen Society of America, so I wanted to read everything by her. So I read The Watsons, and I actually enjoyed it more than Sanditon, which is her other unfinished novel. I enjoyed it more than Lady Susan, which is her shorter novel that is not considered one of her main 6 novels, even though it is complete. I thought it was so funny. I was cracking up at the guys in this book, particularly the main, I forget what his name is. I think it's like Tom or something. It's like everyone wants him, and Emma could not be bothered. She goes to this party and sees a little boy who's sad that no one's dancing with him, and so she's like, I'll dance with you. And then this other guy sees her dancing with this little boy, and that's his nephew, and he's like, oh, you're so kind. Like, I want to thank you for dancing with him because no one would dance with him. And then you're kind of like, oh, is there this romance going on here? But then there's this other guy at the party who all the women always want him, and Emma's older sisters all had their hearts broken by him, and he was expecting her to want him too because she had just come out into society, and then she doesn't, and he's so bothered by it that he goes to her house and is like, what do I need to do for you to want me? Really thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 stars for Jane Austen because she's good. She's just good. Like, everything she writes is great. The next classic that I read was in August. I actually started it in May, but then I took like 2 months off reading it and then got back to it. And that is The Odyssey by Homer, which I had not read anything by Homer. I had never really gotten into Greek mythology. Growing up, I had a lot of friends that did. I never read Percy Jackson. I never read all those books. I never listened to Epic, though I have heard a few songs from it, and it's really good. But I was never into Greek mythology. So I was kind of hesitant to read this because I don't dislike Greek mythology, but it's just not my thing usually. I like Gothic and romantics, and it's a different type of classic. But it is such a staple classic. When I first got into it, I'm like, okay, this is okay. It's a little slow, but it is interesting. And then it just hits this point where you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I just kept reading, and then finished it like so quickly once I hit that one point. Telemachus was probably my favorite character, though Odysseus and Athena were great as well. Telemachus figuring out that it's his dad in disguise. Oh, like that whole plot. I loved it. And then the palace fight. Oh, so good. I don't think I cried enough to be 5 stars. I cry. I'm a crier, guys, so that plays a factor. I'm going to give this a 4.8 out of 5 stars. It was very good. And this is coming from someone who never really got into mythology. And now I've read several mythological books after reading this because it's really good. And it's so worth reading because it's referenced in so many English and theater classes that after reading it, I realized I could understand so much in my classes, and like analogies I'd never even noticed before were there. And I realized, oh, they're referencing the Odyssey. Like, it's so worth reading. And then the Christopher Nolan movie with Tom Holland and Zendaya. Fun fact, I met Zendaya when I was 8 years old. This next book I read is actually another reread, and it is one of the only books I've read 3 times, and that is The Outsider by S.E. Hinton, which is the most modern classic I have spoken about in this video, but it is a classic. It was written by a 15/16-year-old girl, and she wrote gold. That's a reference to the book. It's so good, and every time I read it, I cry. I didn't think it was possible to cry even more than the last 2 times I read it. This was the first book to ever make me cry. I never cried reading until I was in 7th grade reading this, and I got to the end and cried. And it's like happy tears and sad tears. And I don't understand how a book does that. Like, they can make you so happy you cry and so sad you cry at the same time. It's a coming of age book about found family and brothers and friendship, and it's so good. I read this on the plane to New York in October. Yes, I went to New York twice this year. My friend moved there and I missed her, so I visited her twice, and I saw The Outsiders on Broadway and got my playbill signed by the original Cherry Valance, which is pretty cool. I was sobbing on the plane for like an hour, like the last hour of the book, and I read this in one sitting. It's not a long book. It's less than 200 pages, which is pretty short for books. I think average book size, to me at least, I always say is 330. I cried sporadically throughout the book, but for like the last straight hour, I couldn't stop crying. It's so well written. It's such a great coming of age story. Dare I say the best coming of age story I've ever read or watched. Best found family book I've ever read, and I am quite the found family enjoyer. This is a 6 out of 5 stars without a doubt. If you don't read classics and you need a classic to get into, this is the one to start with. The next 2 classics that I read were in October, and I do not have physical copies of them, and they were both plays, so I'm going to briefly tell you what they were. They are staples that are referenced in many courses in writing. Oedipus Rex, which is considered by Aristotle the perfect tragedy. I've read it twice. It's my second time reading it. This may be controversial. I did enjoy Oedipus Rex. It is a horrible story, but in the best way possible. Like, it is so well written and constructed, but it is horrible what happens in the story. But I feel it's worth reading because it's such a great staple in theater and in writing, and so many tragic elements and even psychology like draws from this play. Philosophy and psychology and ethics and theater and English, they all come from this play. Like, that's how important it is. So I think it's worth reading because it affects Western civilization so strongly. It's just referenced in so many things. Like, after you read it, you're like the Oedipal complex, and you catch all these references and you realize the story structure and just how much you see from this play throughout your studies and your life. It's just a staple that you should read. But it is, trigger warning, it is horrible because it's a tragic tale. He's a tragic hero, Oedipus Rex. And if you don't know what a tragic hero is, it's somebody who's doomed to fail. Like, their plot, their story, they're doomed to lose. And their undoing is themselves, and their undoing is a tragic flaw. And his tragic flaw is pride, because he's so blinded by his pride that he doesn't think he can be wrong, that he accidentally finds out something that if he would have never discovered, he could have kept on living. But he just had to poke the bear. He just had to know. He just had to know. But it's also this debate of like, well, wasn't it the moral thing for him to poke the bear and like push to know the truth? But in doing so, he discovers something horrible about himself that makes him, I don't want to spoil it. It doesn't show the violence because it's a play, so it happens off stage, but it is horrible. It is horrible. Like, if you look up the Oedipal complex from psychology, I think you'll know what happens in this play. Because of how well written and influential it is, and how much it's inspired me in my own writing from learning about this play and studying it, I'm going to give it a 4.5 stars. Is it something that I'm like, I need to read this plot because it's such a good plot? It's a creative plot, but is it restorative for your soul? No, it is kind of horrible. But like I said, it's inspired me and I've learned so much from it, and I thoroughly enjoyed breaking it down and learning about it. So I'm giving it a 4.5 because I enjoyed it in that sense. And the other play, The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, which is the first Tennessee Williams play I've read. It is tragic, but I felt like the allegory of the Glass Menagerie was so fascinating, and I felt that I related to each character in a certain way. It's a story about a mother, a single mother, and her two kids, her disabled daughter and her son who wants to be a writer, who's stuck like working this day job because his father left, and he has to provide for his mom and his sister. And the mom, she just wants her kids to do good and have a life she never could and find love like she never could keep. And Laura, who's the disabled daughter, she's just tired of being judged by her mom for not making more of herself. It is a tragedy, but I felt of all the tragedies I'd read, it wasn't the most horrible tragedy. It's not Oedipus Rex atrocious. It was not my favorite play of all time, but I thoroughly enjoyed the writing, and I did cry while reading it. I think I cried twice, and in one of the places I cried, I don't even think I was supposed to cry there, but the writing just hit me on a personal level. So I'm going to give it a 4.5 stars as well. I liked the plot of the Glass Menagerie more, but I learned more from Oedipus Rex, if that makes sense. And so I liked them in different ways. The second to last classic that I read this year was another Shakespeare play, Much Ado About Nothing. I read this for another class, and I've read Romeo and Juliet, The Tempest, Hamlet, Macbeth. I've seen As You Like It, but I haven't read it. And now I've read Much Ado About Nothing. And this is probably my third favorite Shakespeare play. It's my favorite comedy. I love Beatrice and Benedick. They are so fun. Claudio and Hero, although they're the main characters, they aren't as compelling as Beatrice and Benedick. But I still like Hamlet and Macbeth more. But those are tragedies. So this is my favorite comedy. I would read it again. It does use some typical Shakespeare devices though. And Claudio and Hero aren't as compelling. I'm going to give it a 4.3. 4.3 stars. I think that's fair. And last but not least, the last classic book that I read this year, which was also for a class, but I got to choose from a list of classic books, and I had to write a critical essay, a 10-page critical essay, and that is Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. It is nothing like the movie. I haven't seen the movie, but I know enough about the movie to know it's not like the movie. It's not a romantic comedy. There's actually no romantic love in this book. The point of the book is platonic love, which I think is beautiful. The main character isn't in love with Holly Golightly. I like that. I feel like too many books these days just focus on romance, and I think there's beauty in platonic love too. I have all these annotations. Holly Golightly has a tragic backstory. There are some triggering things in this book that they don't dive super deep into, but you do touch the surface of several triggering topics. It's a tragic tale of someone who wants to feel safe. I think my favorite part about this book was like the analogy of Tiffany's. She just wants to be the kind of person one day that can wake up in the morning and be able to have breakfast at Tiffany's. And she says she feels a kind of safety that she doesn't feel anywhere else. And she wants to find that feeling of safety somewhere else in life. And she feels once she finds the feeling that she has whenever she's at Tiffany's, she'll finally have found what she needs in life. In this whole book, it's like she's chasing the feeling of Breakfast at Tiffany's. I wrote my 10-page paper on this book, and I really enjoyed it, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite classic book. It is darker. The characters are all very morally gray. I'm going to give it a 3.75 stars because I did really like it. Like I said, I just talked about how much I liked it, but I actually think I liked A Picture of Dorian Gray more, even though I spent way more time marinating in this book. So if that's a 3.8, this is a 3.75. So this is just, I'm showing you that even though I really enjoyed this book, that just shows how much more I like those other books. So those are all the classics I read this year. That is my most read genre, but my next video will be on my second most read genre, which is mysteries, so stay tuned. I read a lot of genres this year, but I'm doing my biggest ones first.